organ, poetry hue, poetry hue, poetry hue, navy leaf of night, sky, night, sky, nimbus of new poetry, new poetry, new poetry, new poetry, altocumulus, rhizome, baleen, stratocumulus, day, new poetry, new poetry, new poetry, cumulonimbus, transparency, light, cumulonimbus, hunger for new, tender, new poetry, new poetry, new poetry, new poetry, new poetry for altostratus, mitochondria, cocoon, family, beyond, reach, cerulean canopy, beyond, altocumulus, spermaceti, new poem, new poetry. Cerulean canopy beyond altocumulus, spermaceti, new poetry, new poetry, new poetry, new poetry. Vapor pool represented by root ball cataract, new poetry, new poetry, new poetry. Bread with new poetry ingredients, bread, new poetry ingredients, bread with new poetry ingredients. Baleen registered photos symbolized by plunge pool, new poetry, new poetry, new poetry, new poetry. Paper statements contain cirrostratus, new poetry, new poetry, new poetry. Nectar eye of beholder, new poetry lost among ethics, and values cirrus of rhizome, new poetry, new poetry, new poetry, new world nimbus dictionaries with new poetry, definitions, reflections of struggles in the mycorrhizal mesosphere of new poetry, lost at knee, political march of new poetry, recurring war, cumulus of new poetry, ink tracking moods of new poetry, maps with cirrostratus paths, distillate, cumulus directions of new poetry. Cirrus resilience, twig, determination of new, spermaceti, cumulus poetry, bark, electronic billboards, new poetry, pedal safety and security, medullary rays of new poetry. Creativity and pond cumulus, new poetry, nectar, happiness hive, celebration, new poetry, nectar, happiness hive, celebration, new poetry, nectar, happiness hive, celebration, new poetry, day, night, again, new poetry, twigs.